Aldous Huxley was an English writer and philosopher. He wrote nearly 50 books. And here's his quote about history. That men do not learn very much from the lessons of history is the most important of all the lessons of history. Welcome to the History Slices podcast, a mother-son duo discussing awesome bits of history. We prove on every show that history is not boring, entertaining, yet stimulating. This is History Slices. And now, here's your hosts, Jacob and Rachel.
Hi, Jacob.
Hey, Mom.
So, Flight 19 today.
Yes. For those of our audience who haven't caught the last episode, today we're going to be covering Flight 19. Do you know anything about that?
You mentioned last week when we were talking about it, when you were teasing it, that it was one of the greatest mysteries having to do with the Bermuda Triangle.
Yeah.
And that's all I know about it.
Sure. This is a very interesting story. It's very fascinating. I think we're going to get into it as we dive into it. I think it's a little less mysterious than some people say, but we'll talk about all the theories and stuff.
Cool.
So the Bermuda Triangle, for those who don't know, it's this area. It's actually a really large area of above the Caribbean and the Atlantic. It's actually the corners of it are Florida, Panama, and Puerto Rico.
Okay.
Like kind of in that area.
Yeah.
And that makes a triangle. And the reason it's noteworthy is because a lot of planes and boats and stuff throughout the years have disappeared in it. Not so much recently, but throughout history and stuff. I think there's a similar area near like Japan or something like that, but it's just
that has mysterious disappearances.
Yeah, on like a not frequent, but enough that people notice it.
It creates enough of a trend.
Yeah, this is one of those kind of mysterious areas around the globe. If you're into weird stuff like I am, you'll find out all about those. But we're not talking about those. We're talking about specifically this one case. It's arguably like the most famous one. It's like the one that people kind of, if you only know one case from the Bermuda Triangle, it's probably Flight 19.
Oh, okay.
So the date is December 5th, 1945, a few months after the war ended. It was actually a sunny day too, to keep that in mind.
Oh, that is interesting because somebody would think.
Yeah, you think that, they disappeared, it's probably stormy
weather,
or whatever.
Yeah,
messing with their equipment. But no, it was sunny.
And it was just one airplane?
Well, no, what it was is it was 5 torpedo bombers. They were flying out of Fort Lauderdale, which is in Florida, for those who don't know. They're doing a series of bombing exercises, like fake bombing runs, kind of as a routine thing. They weren't the only group of planes on this exercise. They're like, okay, this squadron or group or whatever than this one. And, so it was kind of a routine practice.
Which makes procedure. It even more surprising that there would be anything amiss.
You would think so, yeah. So basically how the route was going to go for them, just so I don't know how much sense this will make because it's like
it's a visual thing.
Yeah,
but that's okay. People can refer to a map.
Sure. Yeah. Basically, the deal was they take off from Fort Lauderdale. They'd go on 9 degrees for 73 miles. They turn 346 degrees north and would head for another 73 miles in that direction. Then turn 241 degrees southwest for 120 miles, and now basically take them home. It was basically like a loop, kind of. That sounds confusing. Don't worry about that. It's just not. They're going for a loop.
They'd go out. They'd go for a loop. They'd come back.
Yeah. They fly for a while, turn, and they're back. That's basically it. I know it's confusing, but that's it. The whole thing would take around 2 to 3 hours, not too long. So I'm going to go through kind of the timeline. Then I'm going to talk about the aftermath, and then we're going to go into some of like just the theories, both the more kind of logical, that makes sense, and more kind of outlandish because they're funny. Yeah, far out, man. Yeah, totally. So 2:10 p.m. Flight 19 takes off to head towards Bahamas. They do their fake bombing run. It's a success. They're in radio contact with, the Fort Lauderdale. It's all going good so far. At 3:40, they send out a distress call. The next squadron, which was run by Lieutenant Robert Cox, his group are leaving for their own bombing run. He picks up their distress signal because that's just, they're in range or whatever. So Lieutenant Taylor, who is in charge of Flight 19, and we're going to talk about the people involved, but the main one to know is Lieutenant Taylor. He says, and this is a direct quote, "Both my compasses are out, and I'm trying to find Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I'm over land, but it is broken. I am sure I'm in the Keys, but but I don't know how far down, and I don't know how to get back to Fort Lauderdale.
Wow.
So I don't know.
At that time, do you know where he was supposed to be?
Well, he's supposed to be like
back at Fort Lauderdale already?
Heading back, yeah.
Okay.
So I don't know how much you know about geography.
Well, I'm thinking the Florida Keys they swoop kind of into the Gulf, which is the opposite side of Florida. So he shouldn't have even been over the Keys.
Yeah, absolutely. But I guess from his position, that's all he could figure out where he was.
Yeah.
Now, Robert Cox, the lieutenant that picks us up, he rails Fort Lauderdale for assistance. He's like, hey, we got an issue going on. And Fort Lauderdale, they advised Taylor to fly up the coast of Florida because they're like, well, what are you doing down there in the Keys?
Yeah.
You need to come back up to us. And none of the in-flight navigators could identify where they were. So it was like there's a lot of confusion going on there.
So you said there were 4 planes?
There was 5.
Oh, sorry, 5 planes. So each one of those planes has an in-flight navigator, and none of them could identify where they were.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, and Taylor, he kept changing course because he couldn't find a recognizable landmark. So he was looking around. He was like, okay, maybe try over here, maybe try over there. But he kept cutting out over the radio. This is like mid 1940s, so they didn't have great radio, but also it could have just been like the distancing or whatever.
Range.
They requested for him to switch his radio frequencies, and which he didn't. It's possible he didn't get
the message.
Yeah, or he did it for some other reason. By 4:30, it starts to storm, which is just like a bad salami on a problem sandwich, honestly, at that point.
Wow. So was that in the forecast?
I'm assuming not if they were running exercises.
True, but they might have thought they'd be all done by then, I guess.
It's possible.
Yeah,
I don't know.
That could just be an aside. That's not really that important, but oh, great. So remind me of the time again? 4 something?
It's like 4:30.
Okay. They're at least an hour overdue, probably.
Probably, yeah.
Okay.
By 5:20, the people on ground, they got the last communication from Flight 19. And it says, we'll continue to fly 270 degrees west until we hit landfall or run out of gas. That's what he said. This is a pretty grim thing. The ground can't talk to them, but because of, I guess, how the radio is set up, they could still hear the crew talking for about an hour or so afterwards.
Oh my gosh.
And at 6:20, they heard Taylor's last order. This was recorded. He said, we'll have to ditch unless landfall. When the last plane drops below 10 gallons, we will all go down together. So
heavy
stuff. Yeah.
Really sad.
So naturally, a bunch of SIPs and planes and stuff were sent out to look for this. They're south of Florida because holy crap, how did this go so wrong? 2 PBM Martin Mariner aircraft, which are, I think, like bigger type of airplane. I don't know military stuff that well, but they divert from their own training exercise to kind of help with the search and rescue. At 7:00, one of these aircraft railed the other.
What was the month this was in? I'm sorry.
This was in December.
That's what I thought. So it's already dark.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
One of those 2 aircrafts radioed the other one for some information, like, hey, what's going on? Where are you? They didn't get an answer. That rescue plane was the 6th and last plane to disappear that day.
Oh my goodness.
Right. So not only did this flight disappear,
oh geez,
one of the rescue search party disappeared as well.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So
how sad and how scary too for the other people who were searching. I'd be like, I don't know, there's something reaching up out of the ocean, grabbing airplanes out of the sky.
What on earth is causing this? Yeah, absolutely. So, while they couldn't find any trace of Flight 19, unfortunately, in the area where the 6th plane went down, they found some debris, but before they can confirm what it belonged to, it sank and they couldn't recover it. Evidently, that type of plane was prone to fuel leaks, so people think that it might have been a malfunction that caused it to crash, which is really bad timing. I mean, it's unfortunate in general, but
but very coincidental that it would have this malfunction while it's searching for planes that disappeared.
Missing. Yeah. So I want to go to some of the theories real quick, because this itself is not too, I mean, I don't want to downplay it, but it isn't like the most complicated thing in the world. This flight went missing. Weird. But I want to talk about some of the theories, and then we'll get more into like the people and some other stuff that's happened in this area.
That sounds good. It's funny, whenever you say this flight, I'm always thinking one airplane. So I always have to remind myself, it's more than one airplane.
Yeah,
so
I'm not sure. It's called Flight 19.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that's what it's called. It might also be a squadron.
Maybe they just numbered their flights. Like all 5 airplanes worked as one, sort of in a team. So maybe it was identified that way instead.
It was a little, when I was researching it, some of the stuff kind of went over my head, some of the military terms and stuff. So I'm like, okay, that's a little less important than like what actually is going on. Sorry if that offends anyone. So some of the reasonable theories, pilot error on the Lieutenant Taylor, who is the guy in charge of Flight 19. And honestly, it's probably the most likely one. It's hard to show without a map to like point out, but it's very possible he got turned around and they mistook where they were. Mm-hmm. You know, like, and
then since he was the leader, he was leading everybody.
Sure.
Yeah. But none of them could read their instruments.
Yeah. Well, we're going to get into that in a moment, but it's, there are other islands and other kind of, you know, smaller land masses, if you will, up in the, mid-Atlantic where they were. That is very possible he mistook that for the Keys, and then we tried to divert course. He ended up just like going in like circles basically, and it would also help explain why they couldn't find any wreckage, because they might have been looking in the wrong place, and by the time
they had a vast area to look because they weren't sure where he might be.
Yeah, and by the time, like, if you even managed to get down to like, he's probably was in this area, you know, the wreckage might have just moved on or sank to the bottom of the ocean, you know, potentially. Another kind of theory that could make sense is magnetic influence could have been messing with the compasses and our equipment, because that does happen. There are certain, I'm not sure what the scientific term is, but there are certain areas on the globe that have strong magnetic, like,
pull or
stuff like that,
influence, like you say.
And it can mess with electronics, it can mess with compasses and stuff like that. And the triangle is one of those areas, which is probably why stuff keeps crashing. Goes
haywire,
yeah, for whatever reason. I'm not sure about the cause, but it is a documented phenomenon that exists.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, that makes sense. And I kept looking for her theories, and I started getting to La La Land. They're really amusing, and I don't want to like just be like, well, no, that didn't happen, because who knows? But I think it's more likely that it was pilot error or whatever,
or instrument failure because of the magnetic influence.
Like, I think that's a little more likely than UFOs, because that's one of it, is that they got abducted or other UFOs otherwise causing the vanish. On a lot of UFOlogy, which is a real term, websites, there's a repeated kind of story about how Lieutenant Taylor reported being chased by UFOs, or reported that like everything looks strange, or and they're going to white water, you know, a lot of weird stuff.
Yeah.
All of which the Navy denies.
Okay.
They're like, no, that didn't happen.
Yeah.
Which the conspiracy theorists are like, well, they would say that because they won't want people to freak out.
Yeah. But by now, because I think this could just be something that's inaccurate that I'm just pulling out, but it seems like classified information has to stay classified for 50 years, and then they can determine whether or not to unclassify it or not. I don't think it's an automatic thing, I guess, maybe. But anyway, we're past the 50-year mark. So,
and we know stuff now that was classified then, you know, like we know, I mean, this is a little later, but we know about Operation Paperclip. We know about MK Ultra. We know about a lot of stuff that we know that FDR was paralyzed from the waist down, you know, like stuff that was not public then, and we know about that.
Right. So it seems like for those UFOologists that the information should be accessible at this point.
And also just to kind of not slam dunk or anything, but to like add more to the thought that they might have, if it was a classified thing, they'd probably release it, is like a couple years ago, I want to say 2016, 15, something like that. Might have been a little more recent. They, the U.S. Navy did release publicly a footage of an unidentified flying object, not saying it was alien or anything like that, but it was just a thing that one of their pilots caught on their their camera or their, whatever, their radar, and he couldn't identify what it was. It was moving crazy and stuff, and they don't know what it was. They're like, yeah, we don't know. We're looking at it. We don't know. So it's like, it's not like they're, hide everything.
Right. So if they're going to release that, they might as well release something.
Yeah, potentially.
That's a good deduction.
Yeah. Another kind of out there theory is that they fell into a wormhole. Yeah,
I thought those only existed in space.
They do, outside of theoretical stuff. And people have claimed to have, fallen into time distortions or whatever, stuff like that, all sorts of outlandish things, which again, I don't know enough about physics or science to judge that.
And
but
I never met anybody who did, but wouldn't that be amazing?
Yeah, but at the same time, I'm like, I don't know, maybe, but I feel it's a little more likely that just
something went haywire and they went into the water.
something more everyday happened. Yeah. So the other disappearances have happened in this area of the world, and not as many. Do you remember? This is a while back. Do you remember when we were talking about D.B. Cooper?
Oh, that was a while back, but yes, I remember.
Yeah, and I had said how plane hijacking used to be much more common.
Right.
And it isn't so much anymore, probably because of 9/11 and increased security and security, whatever. I think it's kind of a similar thing here where because we're much better with radio equipment or much better with just knowing what's up, and staying in contact.
Our technology is stronger and better able to avoid things like that.
Yeah, I think that leads to less disappearances. Right,
which also strengthens the possibility that was probably an equipment malfunction or something like that.
Sure. I want to talk about, this isn't all of them, but some famous ones. So 1918, the USS Cyclops, it was a boat, it was a ship. It had a crew of 306 people, and sometime after March 4th, we don't know the exact time, they just vanished. They just straight up, dropped off the map. Outside of
300 something people.
Oh yeah. Outside of combat, it was the single largest loss of life in U.S. naval history.
Oh my gosh.
Obviously outside combat, So
a lot of horrible things have happened in history.
In 1921, the ship Carol A. Deering, I don't know who it was named after her son, some lady, it was found run aground near Cape Hatteras in North Carolina. Its crew was just gone. They couldn't be located. They don't know what happened to it.
That's even more bizarre.
Yeah, and that's not this is not a Bermuda Triangle thing, but it's not the first time they found
what they call ghost ships?
Yes.
Okay.
In the 1800s or so, I don't remember the exact time. What was it called? There's a very famous case of a ship that they found it just adrift and no one was on board. There wasn't any sign of a scuffle or anything like that. So, I can't remember the name of it right now, but it was a real famous. It was thought to be one of the inspirations for Bram Stoker when he was writing Dracula.
Wow!
Because that was around the time he was writing that. But that was a Bermuda Triangle. Not to start speculating,
not to get too off track, but to me that seems like, and not knowing anything else about it, so maybe it's silly to even speculate, but it seems like they must have encountered some really terrific weather and decided to bail on lifeboats or something. And
that would be my guess, something like that. Or, I don't know.
Because if it was illness, then you would see signs of that.
And if it was a mutiny, there'd still be people on board, they wouldn't just abandon the ship.
Just crazy.
I don't know. It's just one of those things where it's we don't really know what happened there. Yeah. Obviously stuff went down, but it's impossible to tell just from the aftermath. So
goodness,
this is one of those things that's unfortunately lost to history.
Right.
948, a few years after Flight 19, there's actually a couple I have listed here that are grouped around that area. There's a BSAA Star Tiger. It was a passenger aircraft. It vanished. 25 passengers, 6 crew, all gone. They were flying from Portugal to Bermuda. So it was near the last leg of their trip, basically.
Oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm. And then that same year, a Douglas DC-3, it was an aircraft.
Which is a big plane, I think.
Yeah. 32 people on board. No trace of it. It also just vanished.
Wow. And that was just a few years after. Did you say in 53? No.
In 58. It was the same year as the other one.
Oh.
As the
okay.
one
which
from
was 48,
Portugal.
I think you said.
Yeah. And then
I think I would be afraid to fly over that section of the water.
Then the next year, in 1949, BSAA Star Ariel is another passenger aircraft. They're both owned by British South American Airways. That's why they have a similar name.
Okay.
20 people were on board, and it vanished as well. It went down or something. Also, I didn't think to write this down. I don't know why, but Amelia Earhart back in the 30s, I want to say. Might have been 20s. I can't remember, but she also disappeared around that area as well, very famously.
That's interesting. I feel like recently in the past couple of years, there was some plane wreckage found on some island, and it was thought to be Amelia Earhart's.
It's very possible.
But I don't know. I didn't think it was anywhere around there. But anyway, that's a separate topic. I'd have to go Google that to see.
Sure, yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, there's just been a notorious rough spot to go into.
If you were a pilot, wouldn't you fly around that area?
You would think so. I mean, I guess it's like kind of that whole don't be superstitious, we're trying to run a business here type of a mentality. I'm like, yeah, sir, but when there's like a track record of like, especially like, I didn't list all of them because there's a good number, but like just on the list that I have, presented, there's like 3 within 2 years of like stuff just disappearing.
Yeah.
So it's I don't know. It's just one of those things.
It's enough to take notice.
Yeah. It's one of those things that, is an interesting mystery. It's probably not as sinister or supernatural as some people think it is. And maybe it is. I don't know. But I'm willing to bet it isn't. It's probably just some phenomena or something about that area that's very treacherous to cross. And we just don't exactly know what it is outside of like kind of theories about this or that, magnets or whatever.
Right.
So yeah, it's a bit of a downer one, especially since last time when we were talking about, bunyips or whatever it was, or we were talking about, some crazy folktale guys.
Right.
Because I don't think we talked about bunyips. Whatever.
I was like, what?
No, it's squonks or whatever. Yeah. I thought it was a very interesting, very fascinating story. I thought that just, as a mystery, as like a kind of a tragedy, I thought it was like worthy to cover, from a historical perspective.
Yeah.
And I just thought it'd be interesting to talk about.
Now, I know this episode is about Flight 19 specifically and its disappearance, but do you happen to know like what the most recent disappearance or disaster is related to the Bermuda Triangle? Yeah,
it was actually, it was a while ago, but not too long ago. It was in 2008.
Oh, in the 2000s.
Yeah, I know.
Do you know anything about that story?
It was a plane. Yeah, it was also in December, interestingly enough.
Oh.
It wasn't like a big passenger plane. It was like, I think it was like a privately owned thing. There was 12 people on board.
Oh gosh.
So, it wasn't like super packed, but it was enough.
Yeah. I mean, that's still a lot of people, and I'm sure there's a big difference in the electronics and capabilities of a small plane like that versus jetliner or something. So
they took off from Santiago and they're heading towards New York. 35 minutes after they took off, it went off radar and there's a big search operation launched and they couldn't find anything. Wow. Yeah, but it was around that same area.
Wow. In 2008, that is barely historical.
I know, right? I mean, it's before my memory, honestly.
And I mean, it's not before mine, but I don't remember.
Yeah.
I don't remember hearing about that.
I don't think it was, I don't know how big of a news that would have hit at that time.
Right. Wow. 12 people though. Goodness.
Yeah, but it had slowed down considerably after, since like giant, not ocean liners, but, huge ships with hundreds of people on board to like, a little, not that that's any less tragic, I suppose, but it's still like a, it's a difference.
Yeah.
If one could, quantify that.
Right. Well, that was really an interesting, sad, but interesting story about Flight 19. I'm glad I know about it. I'm not going to say I really enjoyed it. I mean, I did, you did a good job telling it.
Oh, thank you.
But I'm always a sucker for a happy ending, I guess.
Yeah, well, I get that. No, it's totally fine. Fortunately, with history, and this has been, I don't want to say thorn in my side because that sounds like it's a personal attack thing, and it isn't. for researching the show because I like keeping it more or less lighthearted and more or less kind of.
But it's hard to find.
History is really depressing and dark a lot of times. Most interesting stuff in history. There's a lot of uninteresting stuff, and I'm not saying that as like an opinion. I mean that as objectively, this would be. No one wants to listen to this.
Yeah.
Most of the interesting stuff is like horrible things happening.
Some sense of tragedy in it, or also some winning success or something humorous. But anyway, Anywho, what are we going to be talking about next time?
Sure. Next time we're going to be going to a place that I know you love near and dear, Spain.
España.
We're going to be talking about bullfighting.
Oh, that's going to be good. Mm-hmm. That's going to be great. So, do you know much about it before you start your research?
Well, I've been researching it.
Oh, okay. So, so before you started, how dare you insinuate on air
that I don't know what I'm doing? No, it's fine. It's totally cool.
I'm just wondering
I know
if you
a little
had,
bit, but not as much as I think other people know.
Oh, okay, cool.
So it would be, interesting to dive into and just kind of talk a bit about its history and about like some of the interesting traditions and stuff.
Cool.
And also we're going to dive a little bit into ethics, which is always super thrilling.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I am looking forward to that episode, even though bullfighting is, we'll talk about it.
We'll talk about it, yeah.
But nice job, Jacob. Nice job on Flight 19. And listeners, thanks so much for joining. We appreciate you.
Yeah, I hope this was entertaining and interesting.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Confucius once said, "Study the past if you would define the future." You've been listening to the History Slices podcast with Jacob and Rachel. We hope you've gotten some useful information from the show. We hope we made you think, and we hope you were entertained. We know we had fun, and we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hook up with us on Facebook at History Slices and on Instagram at History Slices Podcast. Make sure to like, rate, and review the show, and tell a friend about the show. That'll help us out too. One more quote before we go from Michael Crichton. If you don't know history, then you don't know anything. You are a leaf that doesn't know it's part of a tree. Till next time, this is History Slices, signing off.